Welcome, Lisa Ciarametaro, to the Dish with Dina podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and spending it with me.
Thank you for having me.
I am always excited when I have a fellow registered dietitian on the podcast because we have a lot in common from the things that we do just as far as our profession is concerned. But like I always say, whenever I do interview dietitians, is that we could also have very vastly different experiences, and especially with whatever specialties we're in or patient populations we're in. And that brings me to asking you to share with us a little bit of your background and how you got involved in this as a career. And then we'll talk a little bit more about your current day in the life of you.
I was in high school and I had an elderly uncle who didn't get out of the house. He had me run errands for him. I used to do grocery shopping for him. He was on oxygen. And that was sort of my first exposure to dealing with an older adult population, somebody who couldn't do for themselves. And then throughout my high school years, one of the things that I struggled with myself is trying to keep myself healthy. I started to be more aware of wanting to exercise, wanting to eat better, and having no idea how to do it. This was obviously in the 90s, so there wasn't social media available, not a lot of resources, just magazines and things like that. So I started working as a dietitian in a nursing home, and I approached the dietitian that was there and started picking her brain about what it was that she did, what her role was at the facility I worked in, what type of schooling she needed in order to become a dietitian. And it sort of just progressed from there. I stayed working in that environment until I eventually applied to college and got accepted into they called it the CUP program back in the day. And that was at Framingham State. So I went there for both my bachelor's and then subsequently my master's. And throughout the past 20 plus years, I've primarily worked with seniors, older adults in various different settings from rest homes, adult day health, to nursing homes, independent living, hospital settings, of course, and then also in my private practice because I do see more varied clients in the private practice. But obviously, I also see folks that are, 65 plus in the private practice. So that's how I started with nutrition.
This is so fascinating to me when I ask people's origin stories because I come from a land where I didn't even know what a registered dietitian was, but I was struggling with my own health issues and I wasn't sure if I should, I don't know, go into something like Master of Public Health or take just a 6 month certification course or something like that just to get more involved. And as I started asking more and more questions is when people were telling me that there is actually this career. And of course, now flash forward, which I tend to say, now I'm like screaming from the rooftops to advocate for the value of an RD and everyone's interdisciplinary team. But I love that you kind of got thrown into that at a very young age. Like you were very much affected by your personal caregiving of your uncle, by your own personal health concerns. And then also in that facility, you were able to shadow and network and be mentored by somebody, which a lot of people when they're going into their journey academically, they're not starting off with kind of like understanding even what it is. They just have this idea of what they're going to do
Mhm.
when they get out of there. But you've really seen a variety of experiences behind the scenes there. And so I guess now flashing forward, right, with 20 plus years under your belt with all of this, if you had to share advice or guidance, because now the direction of dietetics is a little bit different. We have like a whole new generation of people coming up.
Mhm.
There's some different mandates for us as well. And we also see, I think, healthcare as maybe a whole shifting a little bit in certain directions. But what kind of insight or lessons did you learn that you can now share with people who are interested in coming into this profession? Anything they should be looking out for or advice that you might want to give?
So when I was working in hospital settings and over the last maybe 10 years, I have had students who had come to the location that I was working at for their internship. And one of the things that I always prided myself on was being very realistic with them. So I always shared my experience as far as the coursework that we had to go through, but also the career path. Because, like you mentioned, when I came out of school, there were a couple of different um, avenues that you could go into. Most dietitians that I graduated with were going into hospital settings or community settings. Now it's much different. There's things like social media, working with brands, uh, just even having an online practice, online presence, just consulting. There's so many more avenues for dietitians now than there were, I think, when I came out of college. It would be uh, for me, I think the best advice is to just ask lots of questions. Think about what interests you the most, because I had someone tell me one time, it was actually a lawyer, and he said, you never want to have a lawyer say that they can help you with everything, because a lawyer shouldn't be able to help you with everything. You should go to a lawyer if you're looking for a divorce. You should go to a lawyer if you're looking for bankruptcy. You should go to a lawyer for, you know, whatever it is. People should generally specialize in things. And don't get me wrong, outpatient dietitians can counsel on a variety of health topics. But most of us at some point have some sort of niche that is our passion. And that's really where most of our focus lies. We'll still do other things outside of that because we always have our hands in multiple buckets, I think. Finding somebody who maybe works in the arena that you're interested in, reaching out to them. I think all the dietitians I've personally come across with are always open to talk about what it's like to be in their career, challenges that they have, things that they like about their position or their career. And I would say that's the biggest advice I would have for everyone is to just reach out and try and network, even when you're in school, because when you get out, all those connections can serve you in so many different ways. And that was something I struggled with because I was very intimidated by that. Reaching out to more established professionals, wondering if they're going to want to discuss things with me because here I am just a student. For me, on both sides of the coin, me educating my students and then also them asking questions, I think it works really, really well.
This really supports a lot of what I'm always hoping to get out of these discussions in a variety of different ways. So, as usual, I'm taking copious notes. And also, this kind of ties into I was mentioning to you before we officially started recording that today was a recording day for me. So, I had a few people that I had discussions with, and they were both healthcare providers. And some of the common threads that ran through was exactly that, building up a network of before you even walk in to your whatever your career is going to be, knowing that you have, yes, you have your academic pursuits. So you're probably super busy with juggling a lot of classes and studying for your exams. You might have an internship or some other offshoot of something like a graduate program or a combination of all those things. So you're
Yep.
always going to be juggling something, even in life after the career is done. Maybe it's family or caregiving or, whatever the case may be. So it's good to build and develop that network because I believe that to be a mutually beneficial relationship. What you can bring as a newbie into the experience of that discussion, and maybe even breathing new life into the profession of someone who is sharing and imparting their wisdom to you, and then also allowing that person to share some of their lessons learned and helping you navigate that path. So it sounds like what you're talking about with the interns that came to see you, are you then an actual preceptor in whatever the facilities you were or a part of the preceptor team?
Yeah. So I'm in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
and Framingham State is relatively local to the areas that I practice in. So I've had several students over the years in different facilities throughout Massachusetts come in. They usually have, depending on whether or not they needed to do clinical or community, is the setting that they might be in. Sometimes I also sort of tag team with a food service rotation. If I was working in a long term care setting, we have obviously a food service director or an executive chef. So they would sort of tag team with me doing clinical work, but also sort of looking at, in a long term care setting or in a school setting, you have to look at menus, nutritional analysis. Is it meeting the state regs? Things that they might not even be aware of. So they would get that aspect from me, but then they would also go back and, meet with the food service director and sort of get into the whole production side of things and sanitation and all that stuff. So
Wow,
um,
that's quite a lot in each
it is a
rotation.
lot.
Like I mean, I remember it because that's what we went through as well, but it's like one-stop shopping in your facility.
Yeah, it's really great. Obviously, sometimes we don't have the acuity like an acute care hospital. So if they wanted to see, some nutrition support or certain surgeries or medical conditions, we just don't have those types of cases. But it's still a very good basis for learning a lot because ultimately, most of the time, patients from the hospital come to facilities like where I've worked in the past. So it's kind of just that continuum of care for that particular patient. So,
I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, and I definitely don't want to get on a soapbox right now, but I have some I have some things to say about certain experiences where a preceptor, or listen, it could be anybody, a supervisor, a boss, or
mhm,
whatever, is a little bit less than open and flexible to accommodating a nurturing relationship when a new person is coming in or an intern is coming in. And especially in the case of the dietetics world where we are rotating. So we're going through a different environment or a different person who's like in charge of us as we're going through. So it could be kind of challenging sometimes if you're getting some pushback or I don't have time for this or um maybe even expectations of what a student or an intern, quote unquote, should know from coming in from their academic classes and going into an internship. Do you have any advice on that? What if somebody who is in charge of an intern, a student, a new hire, etc., is not as flexible and lovely as you are, Lisa, where you're willing to nurture that relationship? Is it like buck up and just suck up and this is the way it is sometimes? Or can you give any guidance for somebody who might feel like they are more introverted, a little quiet, a little shy, not as confident to say, "Hey, I'm here to learn. Like, what the heck? I need to get some information from you." What might be some of your guidance for something like that?
yeah, absolutely. I would say so. My experience was the coordinated program at Framingham State. Essentially, you get to the point where you're sort of going through the classes with many of the same students just because of the way scheduling works. So you obviously have a good relationship with those students. You see them on campus. My suggestion would be because I was lucky and fortunate enough to have great preceptors for all three of my internships. You hit the nail on the head because there were some girls in my class that didn't. And I say girls because it was all females at the time. But what they did was because for the most part, we had a list of facilities, acute care hospitals, community settings, and schools. So, what I would suggest is if you have someone you're close with in your classroom setting and they have a good relationship with their preceptor, would it be something on an off shift? So, certainly not during the days that you need to be at your internship. Would they be willing to bring you along on a day that they're going to their internship or potentially, hook you up with even a phone call? I have taken so many phone calls throughout the years and received so many emails from students who were looking to get in for a placement, but we only have so many spots. But I still reached out to them, and most of the time we'd end up being on the phone for a half an hour. And it was just them taking the opportunity, asking me, "Is it okay if I ask you some questions?" And they would just ramble. And it was perfectly fine because I knew what it was like to be in their position. And I asked a lot of questions and I didn't always get answers. And so for me, I'm an open book because there's no reason not to be. I think it's important because, you know, if they're going to go through 4 years of school plus in addition to an internship and all the credentials we need to do. So that would be my biggest suggestion is if they can hook up with another student who maybe has a decent placement or even if it's not an official placement for the school, if there's a hospital or a facility local to them, if they felt comfortable enough, maybe reaching out, introducing themselves, and asking if they could come in for half a day to shadow. I think most places are willing to work with students, especially if there's a potential for involvement or employment later down the road.
I love that because we're framing it in the sense of we're not fixing what's broken. If somebody is resistant to sharing or just has an attitude, I've also
Yeah,
heard a lot of people saying, I try to talk to my preceptor, and it's almost like a sorority kind of hazing-esque type of situation where they'll say, I didn't get my experience like this, so now I'm going to pass that on to you, which is obviously perpetuating an abusive relationship in some way.
yeah,
But like I said, not getting on my soapbox on this, but I love that the redirection is you still need to get your stuff. Like you still need to go shopping around and get your information. So think outside the box, maybe set aside a day or have just a quick conversation. And like you, there are so for anybody listening to this who has had a little pushback or is just a little feeling a little bit underutilized in that sense or not really getting what you need out of the game, know that there are definitely people like Lisa and myself as well who I'll chat on the phone forever if I had the time just to help you navigate and give you some direction. And we definitely want to encourage you. You're our future colleagues. Hello. So we want to make sure you're taking you're getting what you need out of this. So that said, kind of twisting it now into the more patient end of things, I think the same things apply there too, Lisa, as far as asking questions and understanding who the specialists are. Like you mentioned, you might be going to you had given the example previously as a lawyer, but you could be going to your PCP and they could be saying, I'll take care of all these things, but it's really not about that. It's making sure that you're getting the proper information that you need, and not everybody is qualified or is specializing in those nuanced areas of your condition, your age range, your culture, your generation, whatever the case may be. So can you speak to this now? In some of the things that you've been learning over the course of your years, what are some things that you would like for the patients to know, regardless of whether or not you're a healthcare provider or not? Like, we're still humans and we are also patients ourselves, or maybe helping guide the direction of our older adult people that we're taking care of, and what might they want to know or need to know whenever they're moving in that direction of what we need to do next in this new life cycle.
That's a really good question because I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of the patients I've had, specifically, I'll say in my private practice, they usually land in front of you after they have been through the ringer. And unfortunately, I think they just aren't educated enough to understand, like you had mentioned earlier, this career of a registered dietitian sort of was like, what is that? And it's the same thing with some of our older adults. I think it's better now because we see technology being involved. Most folks have a cell phone or a tablet, and they have access to social media and different things like that. So they're learning about dietitians and what we can offer. There's dietitians now that are working in physicians' offices. So that collaboration is also really great because, unfortunately, a lot of times, the patient will go to the physician and the physician is trying to manage multiple things. And you've mentioned, I won't get on my soapbox. This is my soapbox. A lot of times, and some of the physicians that my patients go to are lovely people, great bedside manner, but they started treating them essentially with, we're going to try this medication and see if it helps, even if it's just a Prilosec. We're going to put you on this PPI to see if it helps with your heartburn. And we're going to put you on these bowel regimen to see if it helps with your bowels. And we're going to put you on this medication to see it helps with this, which is fine because obviously that's could be part of the treatment plan, but sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper and find out what's going on, what led the patient to end up with these symptoms, and is there something that we can work on before we get to the medications or while we're looking at medications. And I think for patients, they need to ask those types of questions. Is there anything I can do, as simple as saying, is there anything I can do with my diet? Is there anything that I could be doing with my physical activity? Sometimes they have to be their own advocate, I think, and oftentimes they have to ask for their own referral. And I've had to do this for myself, whether it's physical therapy or another modality, because a lot of times primary care wants to try and give you a solution or a fix at the visit, and not necessarily look at diving a little bit deeper. So I think the biggest advice would be to advocate for getting the referral and asking the questions. Is there anything I can do besides taking the medication?
Right, exactly. And I want to venture into that discussion now too. So I might not have shared this with you before, but I also teach life cycle nutrition as an adjunct professor for undergraduate and also graduate nutrition courses up at the college here in New York City. And a lot of the discussion around the older adult population is that, not statistically speaking, but this is the area where things start accumulating and piling up. And if you are diagnosed with something in your 40s or 50s, or maybe something you've had lifelong, then maybe something else happens as you may or may not be able to manage that condition, or just something happens where you end up having an infection or an illness or an injury or a fracture, or your mind starts going a little bit. And so it just feels like there's a pile up of things that possibly could happen as we start aging. And then therein also lies the placement of pharmaceuticals too. So now you're dealing with side effects and things that may or may not interact with food or themselves, like medications that might offset each other. And so I think, like you said, coming from a standpoint of hopefully the sooner we can educate that population to understand a little bit more about their diagnoses and the questions to ask their healthcare providers in general, but also then making sure that we're advocating for them to dive a little bit deeper of, is this one more medicine that I'm taking? So I always share, my mom has given me an okay to do this, but I always share with my mother's condition. She had high blood pressure, acknowledged it very early on, was put on medicines, and then inevitably, unfortunately, it taxed her system. And now she's got chronic kidney disease. So she's venturing off into the later stages of that. But she didn't know she had CKD. She didn't know she had kidney disease until it was almost a little too late at that point. But nobody ever told her at the time that, it's possible this is might be what's happening when you're taking medicine long term. And these are, informed consent decisions that you should be making. Now, when you see her get anything, she's opening up those inserts and she's reading all the fine print to the point where she's like, I refuse to take anything. I'm like, Ma, this is the pros outweigh the cons with some of these things. So, like you said before, sometimes that's true. There's like a conventional, traditional way of doing things. There could be obviously need for medicine. It's possible you could also take a more holistic approach and work with different modalities and get sleep and stress underway. And these things may or may not affect it. And maybe if you are on medicine, it could be something that you're speaking with your doctor and your dietitian about. How long is too long with it, or what the side effects could be in there too. So can you share with me also about, I was going to say maybe something that might be a hot topic in the senior population.
I spent maybe, I don't know, it was early January. The facility that I'm in now, we have, it's basically called a CCRC. So we have individuals that are living in their own homes. We have individuals that are living in apartments, rest homes, memory care units, rehab. So we just have the gamut of care there. So when I met with the older adult seniors who live in the independent living, so basically it's like they're living in their own homes for all intents and purposes. The topic of discussion was they had a lot of questions about supplements, all sorts of different supplements, because they get, even with social media and advertising, they still get things like Reader's Digest in the mail, or, Woman's World, or, all these different things. And so they just were approaching me on a variety of different things. A lot of them are surrounding diabetes. So, things like cinnamon. They have a lot of questions about turmeric for anti inflammatory. There was one more recently that was brought to my attention. I'm probably going to mispronounce it. Norea. It's for memory. Apparently, this has gotten lots of really good reviews. I had maybe 4 or 5 individuals tell me they started taking it. They just buy it at CVS and they felt that it was helping them with their brain fog, quote unquote, feeling more clear. I think it's like a phosphatidylserine type supplement. So that was an interesting one. So, generally speaking, it was just supplements. And then at the tail end of the conversation, a couple of, specifically the ladies that I was chatting with, were talking about weight loss and just what it's like being an older woman who's gone through menopause, and just all the challenges that they face there. And so we were talking about diet and exercise recommendations, obviously weights and things like that. But then the conversation just naturally turned to them asking me, what do you think about things like Ozempic and Manjaro? It was interesting. It was an interesting conversation to have with them because they were all very interested in bringing it up with their primary care on their next visit. They felt like they had been making changes in their lifestyle and they weren't seeing the results that they wanted to see. And this is a conversation that lots of dietitians have amongst each other. I had a conversation recently about someone who was a little bit younger than that, but dealing with just the hormone changes, the weight gain, all the frustration that she had. And she came to meet with me, and we went through all sorts of things that she could work on because it's a lot. It's a lot. She was a busy lady. And after a couple of sessions, she said, it's not that I'm not hearing you. It's that I'm just getting to the point where I'm done. And it's not that she doesn't want to put the effort in, but she wants kind of a quicker result. So she said she was going to ask for the Ozempic. I can't tell her not to. Um, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this pans out because I have had patients on it specifically for treatment of diabetes, and they do wonderful with it, and they do have experience of weight loss. Their blood sugars are under control. I see that as a totally different scenario versus someone who has no history of diabetes who wants to get on these medications for weight loss. So that could be a whole nother season with Dina, just that topic.
I was just gonna say, this is, I mean, such the deep dive that we can go in because this also brings me like the things that were coming up in my mind of being a woman, however long ago that was for any of us, right? I'm sure at some point there was body image issues, chronic dieting, depending on your household dynamic. Maybe you also saw your mom going through that. Then weight cycling, meaning have a summer ready body, and then I have to get ready for my wedding, and then I have to make sure the holidays and no, I ate too much. And it's just, it's like never ending. So I totally get, especially at a certain point where you're like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. But the other thing that was really surprising to me is generally speaking, from the textbook materials that we read and the things that we're trained on a lot of times, is the older adult population is more at risk for muscle loss and sarcopenia. And,
Mhm.
we actually even err on the side of a higher weight for them so that we can
Yep.
make sure that they're not getting frail and balance issues and falls and fractures and all that stuff. But yet it's still the thread that runs through with the whole
Mhm.
weight discussion and diet, etc. But yes, in general, when we are offering things like supplements, that's the whole point. It's to supplement what you
Right.
need that your body is not getting from ideally whole foods, or maybe you had a surgery of some point that, the malabsorption issue comes up and we have to add supplements to your diet to make sure you're getting enough of those vitamins and minerals or whatever nutritional needs that you need there. And then the discussion around something like Ozempic, which is now touted more as the weight loss therapy, but it's technically for people who are also dealing with, poorly controlled or just generally speaking diabetes in that direction of, having a quicker route to do that. Because as much as we are always going to promote, lifestyle modifications, sometimes your body's just going to do what it's going to do. And especially if there's a lot of things in combination or you've put it through a lot of stress and there might be some, again, things that I always feel like there's a whole hormonal connection to all of these things too, stress and sleep, etc.
Yep.
And I can see people being like, "Just give me let's take my credit card,
Yep.
put me through a machine, and just let me
Yeah.
come out the other end so I don't have to deal with this nonsense anymore." I totally get it. And I really appreciate your ability to, speak to them from that standpoint, but also allow them the non-judgmental freedom that, hey, listen, you're still able to make whatever decision you
Yep.
want to make. I totally get it. It really has to be the pros and the cons. And is this a sustainable factor for you? We don't know how much of anything is too much in our system for the next 20 years. So, make
Well,
sure.
that was my only sticking point with them because,
Yeah.
like you said, I didn't want to come off like I was being judgmental or make any patient, regardless of their age, feel like I'm putting them down for a choice that they're making. I can legitimately say that I really don't know what the long-term side effects are for these medications when used specifically for weight loss, not when you're using it for treatment of diabetes. I don't know what will happen if you stop taking it. I've seen some reports of people who have taken it and come off and what happened to them. Will it happen to you? I don't know. So just I brought that up more of as a point to please discuss that with your physician. Ask them how long they think you might need this for. Because, like you said, are they going to stay on this for 15 years if they're in their 70s? I don't know. That doesn't seem feasible either. So, um,
Yeah. But it's also the more you know with anything. So I really love this whole conversation around coming with language and helping people ask questions because if it does fix a particular problem where you can check that off your list, but then are you still addressing maybe some of the behavioral things or the, the psychological things or the environmental things? Maybe you won't be able to afford certain treatments, or something that is covered by insurance right now might not be covered by insurance after administration changes and different policies are in place. So definitely these, these long-term, and it's so interesting to me too, because I often think of the younger population of like, they don't think past tomorrow, but it's really anybody. Like a lot of
Yeah.
us don't really think 20 something years. We just need to take care of something right now. So again, I'm very compassionate towards that. And I love that approach too of just, we're just here to educate. You can ultimately make that decision. However, there's a lot that we don't know just yet. So it's also like, we'll see what happens as time progresses. Let's get into a current week in the life of you with a lot of things that you're doing and juggling and whatever it is that you're doing in your personal and professional life. Can you share with us a little bit about how you manage and moderate that? And we're talking about things like, I don't say balance, right? Work-life harmony. We don't say balance anymore because that sounds like it's a 50-50 when sometimes it's just totally
It's
not.
definitely not.
And then your professional side of both what you're working with in your senior population and then your private practice. And then is there anything to, do you fit in time for your own self-care, Lisa? Because that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we're leading and living by example, but we're also human people who sometimes don't make the best choices in our lives if we're juggling too many things. So give us an insight into a current week in the life of you.
Sure, absolutely. It made me chuckle because when we were talking before we started recording, you said, I think I have 7 part-time jobs. And was thinking to myself, I think I'm doing the same thing. So right now it's a little bit different. It's summer. So I have 2 kids, 11 and 14. So I don't have to rush to get them up and out the door, which saves me a little bit of hassle in the morning. But generally speaking, during the school year, it's one of the things that I had to make a shift when I had my children was I didn't have the time to exercise at the end of the day. As much as I wanted to for my whole career, I always was go to the gym after work because that's what worked for me. Then when I had my daughter, who's my oldest, things always seemed to go askew. I'd pick her up, she didn't feel well, and then all of a sudden an hour later, I don't have the time. So that was one of the biggest life changes I had to slowly work on. One of the biggest habits I had to create was getting up early and exercising in the morning while everybody was still sleeping, because then there were no distractions, there were no interruptions, and I could get it in because life has a way of happening and getting in the way. And at least I knew I could consistently commit to that. So I try to do that Monday through Friday. I had a couple back surgeries, so sometimes if I'm having a bad day with my leg or something, I'll do something else. But that's priority number one. Then just getting the kids off and ready to school. I work about 50 minutes from my house, so the commute can be looked at in 2 ways. So it can be frustrating. I always check my ways to make sure that I'm taking the path of least resistance. But what I've been doing is I have Babbel on my phone, so I'll throw on Babbel. I've been in media and masters, so I'll throw on a class and listen to that while I'm driving. I try to utilize the time in my car for things that would be beneficial to me. So sometimes, yes, I just zone out and listen to music. Otherwise, I'll call friends and catch up. I kind of see it almost as like office hours in a weird way because I'm stuck in the car. So that's a little bit of my downtime. Then usually get home, dinner with the kids and cleaning up. And it just seems like the time goes by very, very quickly. Try to sit in front of my computer, answer some emails, but then it's 8 o'clock and then you're already starting the bedtime routine with everybody. So it's quick. It's quick. I also tend to get involved in a lot of things. I decided to take the media master's course because that's something that was not a part of my college career either time. There literally I learned the how to use the internet my senior year in college, senior year in high school. So we didn't have laptops. We didn't have all these things. So now media dietitians or dietitians that work with brands, fascinating to me. Fascinating to me. Social media is fascinating to me. So I decided to take that course in addition to I still do some per diem at facilities that are local to me, whether it's in a typical nursing home or a hospital. And then the private practice I have, primarily, I work with a lot of, I'd say 90% of the patients, regardless of age, generally come to see me for GI issues. So those are sort of peppered in throughout the week. I offer virtual, I offer in person. It's 50-50 now. Some folks after the pandemic just feel much more comfortable doing a virtual visit. Other folks want to do in person, but um, it's interesting because I'll work with people on food sensitivities, food allergies, those types of things in the practice, primarily again because it's GI stuff. So that keeps me busy as well. And then when I have downtime, it's mainly just watching TV with the kids, renting a movie, going for a walk, visiting family. My family's from the Berkshires. So going out there, visiting them. That's just not a lot of time.
I was gonna say, before you know it, 168 hours goes so quickly. Even today as an example, right? I this is a lot of being on. I don't normally put this many recordings back to back, but I would never try to cram in a counseling session or try to do something else in between because I definitely need to just give my mind and body a break. So it really is asking a lot of people who juggle multiple things, but not much different than, a lot of times people say, "Oh, I know you're so busy." And I'm like, but not much different than anyone else who's currently leading a program or is an executive in their company or has a large amount of staff that they're overseeing. And maybe they also live an hour away from something too. So, we're all doing the best we can with what we have. But I love what you said about the non-negotiable. It sounded like the PA, right, the physical activity for you, especially with a back recovering
Yep.
from a back surgery, like that's a big deal. Like you have to make sure you're not exacerbating that, and so that becomes almost like a priority for you and making it work. For me, when I'm working with my patient population, if we come to something that feels like an obstacle where they know that there is that friction happening for them, and we try to walk through, okay, so what would be an ideal realistic way? And is that realistic of doing that? Can you put in 15 minutes in the beginning of the day? So the pushback that you might get or the challenges that you might get, how would you help people navigate overcoming that? What did you do if you were talking about your own situation, but you're pretending like it's a patient dealing with this and saying like, I don't know what to do? What if it didn't work? What if moving to the beginning of the morning didn't work? What might be some of the workarounds that you can encourage people to do to make sure, whether it's physical activity or any other modification, that at least it's still there in some way? So when they come back to see us in the next week or the next month, they feel successful at what they were planning on doing.
Yeah. So for those clients, usually if they're really giving me a hard time, not giving me a hard time, but saying that it's difficult, specifically, let's just say they work Monday through Friday, because that's the majority of what my patients do. I'll try to shift their focus to their off days. Okay. So if it seems like the days that you have to get up and go to work or whatever, deal with kids in school, let's look at the off days. You want to treat your, I say workout, but it could be any physical activity, going for a walk, yoga, whatever. You want to schedule it. Schedule it like you're scheduling a meeting, schedule it like you're scheduling a doctor's appointment, put it in a planner, put it in your phone, because you have to sort of get your mindset that it is a non negotiable for you, because it's just creating that habit over time. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be this way forever, but just really, and it also sort of setting the expectation with those around you. So my clients just, I have a lot of women, and one of their biggest challenges is feeling like they're getting pulled in other directions by their work, by their children, by their parents, and they tend to put their own needs aside, and that's not good. So I really try to talk them up and say, you need to let everyone know that you need to do this for you, and you're scheduling this time, and you're going to be unavailable for X amount of time. We talk about the space that they have. Do they have to physically get to a gym? Can they do it at home? I talk about what I did, how I tried to work it in where I got up early so people sort of didn't bother me. Everybody was still sleeping, so I had that time. But that's probably the biggest challenge that I would say I have is like you said, when they're giving you a little bit of pushback, we'll look at areas, like off days, or but then ultimately sometimes you have to professionally give a little bit of tough love and say, especially a client who's come 3, 4, 5 times and you've given them multiple things to work on, whether it's diet, exercise, changing meals, snacks, whatever the situation may be. We can only offer advice, give suggestions, make recommendations. They have to put these things into practice. And if it's getting to the point where you feel like the client's not putting things into practice, is there something going on more where it's like they could be stuck in a little bit of a depression? That's the initiation part of it. Or is something else going on? Are they just there sort of making excuses? And I'll say it's okay to complain. You came to see me because you're frustrated, say, about your weight and you want to lose some weight. And these are all the things that we've gone through. What are the things it's kind of like you can complain about it, but then you need to do something about it because ultimately you're in charge of you. So you say it professionally, but that's really the key factor is I can't make changes for you. And, whether it's you want me to make you a meal plan, you'd still have to follow it. I don't like meal plans. I'm not one that does those, but regardless, you'd still have to follow the meal plan. If I gave you an exercise program, you'd still have to follow it. So you have to put in the work as well. So it's kind of like don't get upset from the results that you didn't receive from the work that you didn't do. So, and that's same goes for me and same goes for you.
I was just gonna say that too, what you were mentioning also before about taking maybe the path of, for lack of a better term, least resistance and going
Yeah.
with the medicine that might get you there faster.
Yeah.
The same things apply here too. So for those of you listening or watching this on YouTube here, uh, we've all been there, right? This is what is known as your stages of change or your readiness stages. So when
Mhm.
you're working with a professional, healthcare professional, we are assessing you. We're assessing what the approach is, and we're trying to give you direction. But also, we recognize that not everything is going to be able to be easily executed. So it's about breaking down things into SMART goals, right? Making things very specific and manageable and things that can be done within a certain amount of time so that you do feel like there's success. So you come back and you feel like there's a reward at the end of it. That said, sometimes it's just not the time to start something. And sometimes you just have to embrace this is who I am and I'm not going to change. And that's okay. We're going to support you with that too. We'll pick a different priority that might be easier to execute until you're ready to move forward with that other thing that you've been kind of
Yeah.
concerned or complaining about. Easier said than done. And there is this kind of general understanding, if I'm saying it correctly, that we tend to underestimate how long things take us to get done within a year and overestimate what can be done in 3. So if you are on some sort of journey, wellness journey, trying to get your cholesterol down or meet a weight management goal or something like that, allow yourself not to do something crazy restrictive and extreme or something that is not going to be easily sustainable because you're going to be back to where you started with. That thing has to have last you a lifetime or a long-term approach in that sense. And I think you would agree with me since I see you
Mhm.
shaking. You're nodding your head there, Lisa.
Absolutely.
Is that, you can't just be like, I'm rushing in, fixing it now, and then popping out again later because those behaviors and who you are going to come back. It's a journey. It's a journey, and it's okay to self-assess and say, maybe I'm just not the type of person who does stuff like this. I'm not the type of person who does laundry. I don't like to grocery shop or do meal prep. That's cool. Well, but you still want to maybe have a certain outcome. So let's figure out how we can implement, convenience or change your budget around or set boundaries with each other so we can get you to point A to point B.
Yeah, and there's so many things that are available. Things like Instacart or even grocery online pickup. I say if you don't have time, so many things. I there's even those meal delivery systems. Worst case scenario, there's so many things that people can add in to sort of simplify and streamline things to keep them on track initially if they're just having a hard time pulling it together,
Right,
putting a
kicking
plan
it
in
through.
place.
Or
Yep.
that even happens maybe if things do switch up where they end up with an injury, illness, or something, a
Yep.
life-changing event happens, they're in the middle of moving houses, whatever, they can fall back on that plan B. Maybe it becomes a plan A at that point. Lisa, is there anything, knowing that we could probably talk forever, obviously, but is there anything that we haven't touched upon just yet based on the conversation we had, words of wisdom, lessons learned, anything else you want to share with our audience?
I think the only thing I would say for everyone is our health is a lifelong journey. I remember when I had my daughter, I wanted to try and get back in shape as quickly as I could be. And I had a close friend who's also a dietitian look at me and say, "It's 9 months up, it's 9 months down." So it was an interesting frame of mind. And I think regardless of where we are in our stage of life, we have to look at everything that we've been through and recognize that sometimes it might take us longer to reach our goal. It doesn't mean that we should quit. And every bit of success is worth it. So even in my own life, my own health journey, as I've gotten older, as I've had health things pop up, you get that level of frustration where you just want to throw in the towel. Why is this happening to me? Just know that you're not alone, and it happens to the best of us. And, you know, looking online for credible information is key. I think I don't want to say anything negative here, but there's so many influencers and other people out there who maybe have the best of intentions, but maybe don't have the best of information or accurate information. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that could be harmful for some people. So I feel like just do your due diligence when you're online looking at social media, any content like that, what the source is. Is there, some sort of product attached to it, which is fine. There are some lovely products out there, but just being aware of that, I would say that's the biggest advice or recommendations I have for people is take your time to reach your goals and just be mindful of some of the things you see and hear on social media because it's not all super accurate.
And I think it also speaks to professionals who are open to adjusting their approach to things as we learn more.
Mhm.
And I also recognize on the same breath there that sometimes we don't have enough of research for things that I get why people want to kind of like quote unquote experiment on themselves. They're
Mhm.
desperate to find a solution. There might be a lot of practice based evidence, like we're working with a large amount of people who are following a certain approach, and it just happens to be that we have really great, amazing results. And those of us in the vicinity in our arenas, should be documenting that and just making sure that we are able to show some form of, positive outcomes that maybe could be researched in a little bit more detail down the line. But for the time being, it might not be there. So we can, as in our world, in the dietetics world, we can only share with you what is has kind of like the stamp of approval. But we also recognize if you want to go on your own and do something rogue or follow something, we're here to support and help you navigate that, and also share with you what the concerns might be too, so that you know what to look out for in case you are suffering the consequences of not adhering to something that might be legit. So thank you for saying that, Lisa. That's a very important part of this conversation, I think, too. I'm so grateful of all the time you spent with me. I do have two questions left.
Sure.
So they're a two-parter. It is, what is on your plate today, Lisa? As in, when we're done, what is the next thing you happen to be working on, whether it's tonight or tomorrow? And then what is the next meal that you might be having?
The next meal I'll start with that one. So my daughter is having one meal that she wants to prepare, which is basically tacos. And then I'm having salmon and sweet potatoes. That's one of my go-to meals, and I absolutely love it. And it's super simple. And I just throw them in the oven with olive oil. I am so boring, but I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. And then as far as what's on my plate, I am actually in the process of working with a fellow Framingham State grad. She is redoing my website, and we are working on my social media presence and just different things to sort of branch out with media developing. I kind of want to gear my practice to be a little bit more online just because it is tricky with my schedule and driving and things like that. So, sort of working on that. And then I'll be on vacation next week. So that's probably the best thing that's on my plate right now. Just gonna take some time and do day trips with the kids and just have fun with it.
No holds barred on that stuff. Everybody deserves balance and freedom and
Yep.
flexibility. I love that even 20 years in that you're finding ways to improve upon your skill set and see future goals for yourself. You're not stagnant, you're willing to challenge yourself. I think that is a great inspiration for a lot of people to take away too. So thank you again for your time, for all of your insight, your expertise. I am so grateful that we got a chance to connect and we got a chance to hang out and chat with each other and learn more about you. Thank you so much for being here, Lisa.
Thank you.